Welcome to Understanding Digital Accessibility. We're excited that you're sharing this time with us. We created this webinar because the word accessibility gets thrown around a lot, but it isn't just about color contrast. This session is designed for anyone who's interested in having a foundational understanding of digital accessibility. We created it as a primer that should apply regardless of your role or background, although some topics may be more familiar to you than others. We hope to inspire you to continue to learn about accessibility and to apply that knowledge in your day-to-day. My name is Rachel Crawford, and I've spent the past 15 years working as a brand, content, and digital strategist. Most recently, I co-founded the Constellation Collective with my partner Megan in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn. My journey toward learning about digital accessibility started when I attended the Confab conference several years ago. Derek Featherstone, the Chief Experience Officer of an accessibility company called Level Access, led a session that changed the way I looked at content strategy and interface design. Last year, I officially became a certified professional in accessibility core competencies by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. My biggest frustration is hearing that accessibility isn't a priority, or seeing partners or clients try to find ways to avoid incorporating accessibility because it requires that they change their process. Especially now with more and more of life moving online, I truly believe in the power of this work and the importance of making everyone an accessibility advocate. As I mentioned before, the Constellation is a partnership between me and my co-founder Megan. The Constellation Collective isn't solely an accessibility company. We're a creative strategy consultancy that works with nonprofits and other purpose-driven ventures to connect the dots between business strategy, organizational purpose, brand ethos, and audience needs to communicate more effectively. At the end of the day, we're systems thinkers and problem solvers. You can learn more about who we are and what we do at theconstellation.co. While we don't work exclusively in accessibility consulting, it's become a part of every project we do. Thinking about accessibility requires a culture shift, examining processes, systems, and roles. We are here to help organizations implement those shifts. So here's our hope for this session, that you leave with a better understanding of the scale of the problem, how many people this really affects, the most common accessibility issues on websites, commonly used tools called assistive technologies, what's happening legally regarding digital accessibility, what WCAG is and how it's used, and how the idea of universal design applies to websites. You'll also find our recommendations for the next 5 articles you should read to continue your accessibility journey, along with a handful of our favorite tools and resources on our website. But before we begin, discussing accessibility often brings up some misconceptions that we want to touch on briefly. First, disabilities are incredibly common, which we'll put some numbers to in a moment. People with disabilities use your site. Can you look at your analytics and figure out how many? The answer is no. It's mostly not possible technologically to see who uses screen readers to access your site, and people with disabilities are a protected class, so it would be illegal or unethical to try and find out. Second, accessibility is not just a checklist you can go through at the end of a project. It requires a comprehensive look at your content, how it's created, and how it's delivered. Third, we've often been asked, which disabilities should our organization prioritize? And the answer really has to be all of them, because people with disabilities are not a monolithic group, and many people have multiple disabilities. There's no such thing as a 100% accessible site for that reason, but perfection shouldn't be the enemy of the good. The goal is to make as much of the web accessible to as many people as possible. And finally, regardless of how well you understand accessibility, you can be an advocate. Even just asking the question, is our site accessible and what can we do to make it more accessible, will start to create change. Kimberly Crenshaw is a professor of law, co-founder of the African American Policy Forum, and she originated the term intersectionality. She said in an interview, Intersectionality can get used as a blanket term to mean, well, it's complicated. Sometimes it's complicated is an excuse not to do anything. Disability is a core part of intersectionality, and accessibility can fall prey to the same assumption, that it's too complicated to address. But at the end of the day, accessibility is an issue of social justice. In recent years, there's been an important emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI initiatives. These can apply to internal culture and systems, hiring practices, physical facilities, and more. Both the nonprofit and for-profit sectors have turned their attention to creating more equitable, inclusive companies. Diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't just about race, gender, and sexual orientation. It also has to include people with disabilities. We're borrowing from the Ford Foundation's definition of DEI here. Diversity is the representation of all our varied identities and differences, collectively and as individuals. Equity seeks to ensure fair treatment, equality of opportunity, and fairness in access to information and resources for all. And inclusion builds a culture of belonging by actively inviting the contribution and participation of all people. Unfortunately, digital accessibility has not often been a focus of this work, and that has to change. Because accessibility is not a niche issue. An estimated 15 to 20% of the global population is considered to have a disability. And the CDC estimates that in the US alone, that number is 26%, including 2 in 5 people 65 and older, 1 in 4 women, and 2 in 5 non-Hispanic American Indians, Alaska Natives. That all adds up to a massive market in the range of $200 billion in the US. And because aging increases the likelihood of having a disability, there's a very large group of people who have money to spend online who don't even consider themselves to have a disability, yet require a more accessible web. In fact, fully half of all persons with a disability are 65 and older. So why does this matter? The internet is a component of nearly everything we do. For example, how often do you have to look up directions? Do you even know how to read a paper map? How many pairs of sweatpants did you buy this week? What recipes did you look up before eating peanut butter toast for dinner again? How many hours have you passed watching videos or putting videos on for your cats to watch? And when is the last time you made a phone call to book an appointment? Certainly, if you're a fellow millennial, the idea of making phone calls horrifies you. How often do you have to look up a fact to win an argument? For example, what's the only marsupial in North America? Opossums. Did you know that opossums have 13 nipples arranged in a circle with one in the middle? Or that they're such good groomers they slow the spread of Lyme disease? Or that they have opposable thumbs on their hind feet? Well, now you do. So remember that when you have a frustrating experience with one of these essential tasks, a confusing checkout form, losing your filters when browsing for products, or just non-intuitive user experience, that these frustrations can be 100 times worse for someone with a disability. Next, we're going to talk more about the kinds of disabilities that we have to keep in mind when building an accessible web. It can be easy to forget that some disabilities are invisible. Some disabilities are temporary. Some are age-related, and that people with disabilities are just as diverse as any other group. We tend to think about disabilities in accessibility as falling into 3 categories. The first are physical disabilities. This category is probably what most people think of first by picturing a person using a wheelchair. But physical disabilities that can affect web use are much broader and include fine motor control, use of hands or arms, sight or hearing related disabilities, and motion triggers like seizure disorders, migraines, and vertigo. Color vision deficiency, commonly known as color blindness, is particularly common. An estimated 8% of men and 0.5% of women in the US have some form of color vision deficiency. What you're seeing on the right is a chart that shows at the top what quote-unquote normal color perception looks like. The 3 gradients below then display 3 types of color vision deficiency and what color spectrums are perceivable within each. Leave it to the great Bob Ross to be thinking about inclusivity in his art. He said, "I had a man come to me and he said, 'Bob, I could never paint because I'm colorblind. So I thought today we'd do a picture in gray just to show you that anyone can paint.'" The next category are cognitive disabilities. They may not come to mind as readily, but they're a really important component of digital accessibility. Cognitive disabilities include those that affect attention, time management or executive function, memory, processing speed, and making and understanding choices. Disabilities that affect the perception of letters and language, like dyslexia, or numbers, symbols, and math, like dyscalculia, are also part of this group. Executive function can be affected by autism spectrum disorders, as well as depression and ADHD. ADHD, of course, also affects attention, and it's extremely common, and perhaps more common among adults than is currently reflected in statistics. ADHD is reported to occur in about 4.4% of adults in the US, but up to 85% of children with ADHD are at risk for having the disorder as adults, meaning the adult figure is likely underreported. And last, we have a category we call situational. Some of these may be temporary physical or cognitive disabilities, like a broken wrist, but some of the issues we consider in this category aren't disabilities exactly in the same sense. Instead, they're situations where people may be literally disabled from using something based on their technology or context. For example, having difficulty reading a screen in bright sunlight, having a slow connection speed because literally everyone is on Zoom simultaneously, wanting to watch a video with no headphones, or needing to plug in your mouse and use your keyboard to navigate. Of course, these kinds of disabilities aren't counted in those disability statistics we just looked at. So now that we know how many people this affects, including many people in your life and possibly even yourself, how accessible do you think the current state of the web is? How big is the problem? We'll start with the bad news. WebAIM conducted a study using automated accessibility software to determine how many of the top 1 million homepages on the web have automatically detectable failures, and found that 98.1% of the pages failed in at least one way. This is the state of the internet right now. But it's not all bad news, because we can all do something about it. The most common errors are actually relatively easy to fix, depending on your underlying systems. We'll talk about most of these in more detail in a bit, after reviewing some of the common ways people with disabilities use the web. These most common issues include low contrast, missing alt text, empty links, missing form labels, missing document language, and empty buttons. Next, we'll spend some time reviewing common assistive technologies to have a better understanding of how users with disabilities may experience the web differently. So what is an assistive technology? An assistive technology is defined as any item, piece of equipment, or product system that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. So that could be something like a pair of glasses, or a walking stick, or a wheelchair. But we're talking about digital accessibility today, and so the assistive devices that are the most relevant for us to understand better are hardware and software, that allows people to interact with digital information. That includes something as simple as a keyboard and complex hardware like a dynamic braille display. We'll look at some examples in a moment. The important thing to remember is that essentially these technologies are acting as a go-between. Machines have to be able to understand and interpret your content. Instead of a person's eyes interpreting a visual image, their screen reader software must be able to interpret that visual and then translate it into auditory information or braille. If the visual content isn't created the right way, then the screen reader software can't translate it for the user. Keyboard navigation is one of the most essential components to accessibility. These short videos created by the Web Accessibility Consortium are a great primer. This particular video will show us how keyboard-only navigation may look for different types of users.
Web Accessibility Perspectives. Keyboard Compatibility. Not being able to use your computer because your mouse doesn't work is frustrating. Many people use only the keyboard to navigate websites, either through preference or circumstance. Whether it's temporarily limited mobility, a permanent physical disability, or simply a broken mouse, the result is the same. Websites and apps need to be operable by keyboard. Web accessibility, essential for some, useful for all. Visit w3.org/WAI/perspectives for more information on keyboard compatibility.
Now we'll look at how keyboard navigation can work on a real site. We chose REI because they have a good focus on accessibility, and you'll see some important features in action here. I'm going to start tabbing into the home screen, and the first thing you'll see is a series of links that appear at the top left. These are helpful shortcuts for keyboard users commonly referred to as skip navigation links. So on my first tab, you'll see it brings up this REI accessibility statement. Another tab allows me to skip to main content. This basically means that I can skip over all of the top navigation and move straight to the primary content on that page. Then they have a shortcut to skip to Shop REI categories. This assumes that I don't want to tab through all of these kind of upper navigation items, REI outlet, used gear, etc. So I'm going to click enter, and that takes me to this main shopping menu. I tab again and it highlights camp and hike. Now notice that these are very visually highlighted as well, so I know where I am on the screen as I tab. I'll hit enter again here, which opens the menu. My first tab takes me to the X, which means I can close out this menu if that was a mistake. And then I can subsequently tab through all of these subsections and hit enter to go to a page. Then if I hit tab on this new page, the same series of selections in the top left happen. And here I'll skip to main content, which then just takes me down to shop. Now I mentioned screen readers earlier, which are a type of software that interprets visual information into audio or braille. Yes, people who are blind, of course, use screen readers, but so do people with low vision or people who are better auditory learners than visual learners or may have dyslexia. There are a few popular free and paid screen reader softwares available, including JAWS and NVDA for Windows and VoiceOver on Mac, and they all work slightly differently. VoiceOver is built into every Mac product, so it's easy to turn it on and check it out for yourself. There's even a step-by-step training that walks you through all of the key functions. So now we're going to see a brief demo that shows how the software reads out headings on this page. Screen reader users often use what's called the rotor, a shortcut to navigate through all of the headings on a page at once. It also lets you look at all of the links together. Headings in this case refer to HTML headings, which is part of the code. HTML headings should be used to help a user understand the structure of the page, essentially its outline.
You are heading level 1 2 items. Black heading level 2. Features. Heading level 2. Technical specs. Heading level 2. People also viewed. Heading level 3 2 items. Pets. Warrior climbing helmet. Black diamond half dome helmet vertical line REI co-op.
Next, we're going to talk about screen magnification software. Zoom Text is an example of a Windows-based screen magnification software. This can be helpful for users with vision-related disabilities. It controls settings that define how the pointer looks, screen colors, size of the text, and level of zoom. Someone using screen magnification may only be able to see small sections of your page at once, which makes proximity and placement of elements very important. Here you can see the menu in the left-hand picture, and in the front picture, this is one of the options for the pointer, which gives you this very large blue pointer and a red cross, so it's very clear where you're pointing to on the page. Blind users who prefer Braille to voice-over commands or auditory information may also use dynamic Braille devices, as do people who are deaf-blind. This video is demonstrating a particular type of dynamic Braille display system. It includes a special keyboard at the top for typing in Braille, as well as navigation buttons on the sides. In the center, the small grid of dots is where the dynamic Braille appears, and you'll notice it changing as this user scrolls through different areas of the site. In this particular example, they're also listening to voiceover, so you'll hear another example of that, and the Braille is reflecting that text.
Safari, Freedom Scientific, link, image.
Safari has loaded to the freedomscientific.com homepage. I'm going to navigate through some of the web page using the right navigation rocker.
Address, HTTP, reader, reload, search, Google. Close tab 4 products 4 load selected. New tab, button, Freedom Scientific, link, skip to main content, in page link, change page 4 low vision, search, ellipsis, search, button.
I can even use the left navigation button to move through different headings or other web page elements. I'll move through different headings now.
Ruby XL HD, larger screen, longer battery life, increased image storage, heading level 1, low vision products, heading level 2, blindness products, heading level 2, link.
And so it also makes sense that if, for example, fields of bright white trigger a migraine, you might want to change the settings on your entire operating system, not just for using the internet. Operating systems provide their own accessibility features, including light and dark modes, contrast, cursor size, and reduced motion. So let's quickly recap what we just talked about. So far, we've learned that up to 25% of the population has a disability, and that those can be physical, cognitive, or situational. We've learned that opossums have opposable thumbs on their back feet, and we've looked at several popular assistive technologies that help people with disabilities navigate the web and digital products. Now, we're going to revisit some of the most common accessibility issues on the web and start to connect the dots. So remember this chart? Now we're going to look at each of these issues one by one and provide some examples of what can go wrong. When text has low contrast against the background, it can be unreadable for people with color vision deficiencies, low vision, or users in bright sunlight. You're seeing here a popular color contrast checker from W3C for determining if your color combinations are accessible. You can see here that this pale mint on top of the bone color fail across all the criteria for accessibility. Low contrast can also be annoying for all users because it causes more strain and effort to read text. Missing alt text. On this page, you're seeing a screenshot of the Charity Water website. The image is showing a photo of someone holding a bar of soap, and it's associated with information about how the organization is helping communities during COVID-19. On the upper right, you'll see the code for this particular image outlined in the dotted pink box. The code snippet we've shown inside that box is where the alt text should be. Alt text is a text-only description of visual content, and it's critical so that non-sighted users can understand imagery. Without proper alt text, Screen readers may read out long, cumbersome file names or URLs, and non-sighted users will have no idea if the image, icon, or infographic in question is conveying important information. A screen reader user may experience this image as reading out the source URL, https:// etc. Empty links and buttons. Empty links and buttons often occur when an icon or visual is used to perform an action or take a user somewhere. In this example, the search icon in the header is a link, yet it has no accompanying text that a screen reader would be able to interpret. And as we just saw in the screen reader demonstration, someone who uses a screen reader is listening, not seeing. So if there's no text to tell a screen reader what a link or button does or where it goes, a non-sighted user will be totally shut out from this experience. Missing form labels. Visible, programmatically linked form labels are extremely important for accessibility. It's possible to design a form that looks visually correct, but behind the scenes is not properly connecting the titles of the form fields with the inputs themselves. This is a case where not using native HTML elements for their intended purpose can make accomplishing tasks very confusing for screen reader users. But it's not just screen reader users that this affects. Putting a form field label inside the form where it will disappear once a user starts typing also has a negative impact. A lot of times designers do this because it looks cleaner or somehow less cluttered, but it's really problematic. For users who have short-term memory issues or simply got distracted from the task at hand, as soon as they begin typing, the context for what they're entering into the form is lost. Missing document language. This one is so easy to fix. Using the HTML language attribute is really important so that screen readers know what language your page is in. It can also be used to specify if snippets of text are in a different language than the primary content of your page so that they're pronounced correctly. And it's really just this tiny piece of code that needs to be added. So you may be wondering, now that you've seen all of these common problems, if people with disabilities are a protected class, what does the law have to say about digital accessibility? Just as a note, today we'll be talking about accessibility laws in the United States, although of course there are unique laws in other countries. Here in the US, there are a few notable federal laws that are designed to address accessibility broadly. The Americans with Disabilities Act, originally passed in 1990, is likely the most well-known. Sections 504 and 508 of the Rehabilitation Act apply specifically to government IT systems and programs. The Air Carrier Access Act of 1986 provides rules and regulations to ensure that people with disabilities have reasonable and fair access at airlines and airports. And a new rule was added in 2013 requiring that the websites of airlines also accommodate users with disabilities. And then each state has its own set of laws that may apply. When we think about the ADA, perhaps the first thought is an ADA bathroom or Braille on a sign. And it's true that because it was passed before our lives moved online, those kinds of accommodations were largely its original intent. So even though the ADA says nothing about web accessibility specifically, many of the web accessibility lawsuits in the United States invoke the ADA as the basis for the legal complaint. Specifically, they refer to Article 3 from the ADA. Article 3 of the ADA is the most often cited in digital accessibility lawsuits. It covers what are known as public accommodations, essentially private businesses such as restaurants, theaters, hotels, and stores. These businesses must meet certain requirements, some of which are most relevant here for the digital world we're talking about. Article 3 specifies that businesses must provide equal access to goods and services, provide auxiliary aids and services for people with communication disabilities, and make reasonable modifications to policies and procedures to ensure equal access. So even though the ADA doesn't clearly articulate digital accessibility standards, we've nonetheless heard some interesting things from clients and agencies. Quote, "We want our website to adhere to corporate ADA standards." And, quote, "Most of the work we do is ADA aware, if not compliant on level 1 or 2. The truth is the ADA isn't clear. And if you hear someone use the ADA as shorthand like this, it's likely they're not very familiar with accessibility. So what does pizza have to do with it? One of the more famous digital accessibility lawsuits is an ongoing dispute with Domino's Pizza. A man who is blind sued Domino's when he wasn't able to order pizza online using his screen reader. Most lawsuits about digital accessibility involve blind plaintiffs because it's pretty easy to prove that a site can't be accessed by a screen reader. In 2019, the Supreme Court declined to take on the case, delivering a blow to Domino's, which is still in the appeals process. Presumably, paying to make their site accessible would have been much faster and less costly than taking this lawsuit all the way to the Supreme Court. Another thing we hear is, why can't I just build a separate version of my site that's accessible? And historically, the idea of separate and equal has not been such a great idea. And importantly, it has also not proven to be an effective strategy in avoiding lawsuits around digital accessibility. Inevitably, the separate site becomes unequal if it wasn't already from the start. So if there aren't really any comprehensive digital accessibility laws, how do you know if your site is accessible? And what criteria are the courts using when someone is sued? WTF is WCAG. This is where WCAG comes in. Officially it's pronounced WCAG, but some people say WCAG. WCAG stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it has become the standard measure of website accessibility in the absence of clear language in the ADA. The WCAG guidelines are organized as a set of success criteria that define a website as accessible. WCAG is not a legal guideline, but has been developed in cooperation with individuals and organizations around the world. The most current version of WCAG is version 2.1, and compliance can be deemed A, essential, AA, ideal, and AAA, high level. The Obama Justice Department used WCAG version 2.0 AA compliance as the working definition for digital accessibility in its lawsuits, and so that level of compliance is most often cited as the standard. But it's important to note that most of the new success criteria incorporated into WCAG 2.1 apply to cognitive disabilities, which are harder to use as the basis for a lawsuit, but which we learned earlier are still a very important component of accessibility. WCAG is a very long, very detailed set of requirements. It's also pretty technical and not written necessarily in a way that's very friendly to non-experts, which isn't very accessible. You don't have to know every single WCAG criteria to be an accessibility advocate. We'll talk about official WCAG conformance in a bit, but unless you are directly responsible for guaranteeing your organization hits a certain level of WCAG conformance, you really just need to start by understanding the principles that drive WCAG. The WCAG is broken into 4 sections, which help to categorize the conformance criteria, and they're known by this acronym POUR: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. The perceivable criteria describe how content must be perceivable regardless of physical ability. One example we've already talked about is alt text. In this visual, the alt text reads, "Protesters outside Mong Kok police station in Hong Kong last summer." Here, the alt text is actually the same as the caption, but sometimes that won't be the case, and of course not all images have visible captions. The operable criteria describe how users must be able to interact with a site with a variety of input devices, such as a keyboard versus a mouse, without time limits and without inducing physical reactions. There are very detailed criteria around providing users with the ability to extend timed tasks, like in this checkout. Understandable criteria define requirements for content that is understandable, predictable, and fixable after user error. For example, it must be clear to users how to correct errors in forms and possible for keyboard-only or screen reader users to make those corrections. And essentially, the robust criteria is all about clean code. But what does clean code mean? Basically, that development languages like HTML are used as intended, and that they are annotated and marked up properly. The robust criteria says that your information must be able to be interpreted by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. This goes back to our earlier point about machines needing to read your content. So what if you do want or need to conform to a certain level of WCAG? First, you have to start with an audit, assuming you already have a site. There are free automated in-browser testing tools available. Axe and Wave are two that are popular. But automated software only captures about 30% of accessibility errors. So next, you need a human to perform an audit. Once you've identified all of the accessibility issues on your site, you can remediate them to the level of compliance you're aiming for. Making a conformance claim is completely optional and rather involved. And for some context, meeting A accessibility involves 30 success criteria. AA has to meet all of those and an additional 20 criteria. And AAA adds 28 on top of that. So that was a lot. To recap, the shorthand you need to remember for WCAG is POUR. Websites must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. WCAG is the current standard for measuring web accessibility. Version 2.0 level AA compliance is generally used as the standard in lawsuits, although 2.1 is the current version and includes new criteria that address cognitive disabilities. To achieve conformance, you have to evaluate the current state of your site with both automated and manual audits, and then remediate those issues to the level of WCAG you're aiming for. Whew! You may be asking yourself, isn't there an easier way to make your website accessible? Some technology that will fix it all in one go? But unfortunately, there is no quick fix for compliance. Liz Jackson is a disability rights advocate and designer who defines something known as disability dongle in this tweet. A well-intentioned, elegant, yet useless solution to a problem we never knew we had. Disability dongles are most often conceived of and created in design school and at IDEO. So that's a snarky way of highlighting the problem of non-disabled people over-engineering solutions to accessibility issues. Instead of using proven solutions like adding more ramps, someone invents a wheelchair that climbs stairs. An impractical, expensive, and potentially unsafe device. Another example is this glove that purports to translate American Sign Language. This whole idea ignores the complexity of ASL and the role of facial expressions in defining tone, and it's designed to meet the needs of hearing people, not people who are deaf. It requires the person signing to acquire, transport, and wear the glove, and modify the speed and style of their signing. In other words, perhaps well-intentioned, yet ultimately useless. A disability dongle. Web accessibility isn't immune to disability dongles. There's a whole industry now that has cropped up as lawsuits around digital accessibility have increased, claiming to fix accessibility problems with JavaScript overlays. Just Google accessibility compliance and you'll see about a dozen of these companies promising conformance in minutes with zero effort. This example shows a particular one called Userway, whose icon is a somewhat offensive person in a wheelchair on a laptop. For the record, using a wheelchair in itself doesn't affect someone's ability to surf the web. This menu you're seeing can be triggered by clicking on the wheelchair logo, and it brings up these features like keyboard nav, read page, contrast. The major problem with overlays like this is that they don't fix underlying problems in the code. If your image does not have alt text, these cannot magically add information. They duplicate built-in browser and operating system functionality. For example, if someone needs high contrast mode enabled, it's likely they've already done this at the operating system level. The contrast button here is a belt and suspender solution. They create a false sense that the work is done, and they force users to learn a new type of interaction instead of just fixing the root problem. In short, if it seems too easy, it probably is. There are other companies that combine overlays with supposed expert monitoring. AudioEye is an example of this. They promise, again, that with a single line of JavaScript, they can monitor your site and ensure ADA compliance. They claim no need to change your source code, no need to change the design of your site. Accessibility expert Carl Groves says, "They are terrible. They fail to provide anything beyond a marginal benefit for the end user and are, at best, a band-aid over a gaping wound." Carl Groves feels the same way about overlays. Friends, please don't make fun of kids for believing in Santa Claus. There are grown adults who believe overlays can make your site accessible. Now we know that's impossible. Thankfully, not all accessibility companies are trying to swindle you. Here are several companies that offer a host of services and helpful blog posts and other great tools that we trust. Okay, now that we've learned about some of the factors that make sites accessible and what not to do, what does that mean for teams? Now we're going to talk a little bit about who is involved in making accessible websites a reality. The concept of universal design applies here. Universal design is the design of buildings, products, or environments to make them accessible to all people, regardless of age, disability, or other factors. Universal design is considered from the beginning, integrated, and in the best examples, delightful for everyone, not a tacked on afterthought. That's certainly true about curb cuts and wheelchair ramps, but also applies to websites. On the left, you see a huge fail, a curb cut followed by a lane divider with no curb cut right in the middle of the crosswalk. On the right, beautifully integrated, colorful ramps at Enabling Village in Singapore. These ramps were obviously integrated and planned for from the beginning, and the same needs to be true for web accessibility. You have to plan for it, design it, build it, and maintain it. Implementing accessibility requires input and participation across every function. All of these roles are critical. It's not just the responsibility of the developer to make a site accessible. Each role adds a piece to the puzzle. That's why we all have to collaborate on accessibility. We need to bring in allies who can do the things that we can't do ourselves. Content creators are responsible for elements including alt text, link text, writing in plain language, and implementing video captions. Visual designers have to think about things like type size and styles, color contrast, button design, and tab focus style. UX teams and designers need to be able to create clear, consistent navigation and accessible interactivity. And developers have to then implement the code and include accessibility, ideally with real users with disabilities, in their quality assurance process. So clearly, when you're dealing with so many functions across departments and skill sets, you need more than one person pushing for accessibility. You need a consensus on your approach. You need to set concrete goals that you can measure against. You need workflows and systems that include accessibility from the beginning. And really, you need direct contact with users with disabilities, especially when testing new or non-standard features, and ideally from the very beginning of the design process. Finally, you need to reevaluate and make improvements over time and continue to learn and understand the best current thinking. We love this quote from Haben Girma, who's a disability rights advocate and the first deafblind woman to graduate from Harvard Law. She's an incredible speaker and very funny. We highly recommend you look her up and watch her in action. She says, "When you do disability accessibility, you're not doing charity. You're doing powerful work that helps your organization grow. It helps you reach more customers and it drives revenue." We've covered a lot of ground in this session, so here's a quick recap of what we've learned. First, the stats. Luckily, if anyone questions why accessibility is important, the numbers speak for themselves. Somewhere between 15 and 25% of the population has a disability. Half of people with disabilities in the US are over the age of 65. Disabilities that affect web use can be categorized as physical, cognitive, and situational. 8% of men and 0.5% of women have some form of color vision deficiency. 98.1% of the top million homepages on the web fail automated accessibility tests. And more accessible sites benefit 100% of users. Many people with disabilities use assistive technologies. Understanding how they work is essential to understanding and addressing accessibility. These technologies include screen readers, screen magnification software, keyboards, and dynamic braille displays. The law. There are a number of federal and state level laws that address accessibility. The ADA does not have specific language around what is required to make a website accessible. In the absence of that definition, the courts are currently defaulting to WCAG 2.0 AA as the guideline. And there is no such thing as a separate and equal accessible site. WCAG stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Its current version is 2.1, and it's organized into 4 areas using the acronym POUR, which stands for Perceivable, Operable, Understandable, and Robust. Conformance levels are deemed A essential, AA ideal, and AAA high level. And overlays and automated monitoring solutions cannot make your site meet WCAG. At the end of the day, accessibility matters for a ton of reasons. At its core, it's about inclusion, but accessible sites also provide huge advantages with better SEO, better performance, clearer content, and user experience for all users, and helpfully, no legal action. You may be asking yourself, what now? And we think the best place to start is probably with more questions than answers. Start with, what is our organization's approach to accessibility? Who on our team is responsible for which aspects? Are our external partners familiar with accessibility? And are the tools and systems we use accessible? Then take the first steps. Create an accessibility task force. Write an accessibility statement. We'll look at an example of this in a moment. Run one of those automated free auditing tools on your site, Axe or Wave, and commit to further learning. Accessibility statements are a great place to start in defining your site's commitment to accessibility. Nature.com has a nice example. And one of the simplest first steps is to create a specific email to capture feedback on your accessibility page. This way, users who are having issues have a direct line of communication with you. And just like any topic that's complicated, you can't learn everything in a day. Here are a few next steps we recommend. Get Laura Kahlbag's book, Accessibility for Everyone. Watch Tatiana Mack's Skillshare class on accessible design systems. Follow some accessibility professionals on Twitter and read our top 5 favorite articles, which you can find on our website at theconstellation.co/A11Y. And a note about that acronym, A11Y stands for accessibility. It's a shorthand. The number of letters in between the A and the Y are 11. So there are also a few ways that we can help. We provide a number of accessibility-specific services, but also communication strategy in general. We do audits, team trainings and custom workshops, consulting of all sorts on website projects, helping to put together creative briefs and select teams that also care about accessibility, workflow design, content development, so plain language review and development, and overall content and communication strategy that actually takes accessibility into account from the beginning. So we hope you'll reach out. If you write to us and mention one of our Opossum fun facts from earlier in the presentation, we'll give you 30 minutes of free accessibility consulting. And we want to thank you so much for spending this time with us today. We hope this is just the beginning of your accessibility journey, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you so much.